This is Evolve CPG's Brands for a Better World podcast, featuring purpose-driven leaders who not only believe in better, but actively pursue it. That's better products, better brands, and better leadership for a better world. Thanks to you, our listeners, this podcast is now ranked in the top 10% of all podcasts globally. Let's not stop there, though. You can help us reach more people by taking a moment to leave us a rating or review, which is critical for podcast algorithms, and by sharing your favorite episodes with your network. The more people we reach, the more good we can bring about in this world. If you work in the industry, you can also join our online community where we're going further, faster, together at community.evolvecpg.com. I'm your host, Gage Mitchell, founder and creative director of Modern Species, a sustainable brand design agency helping better brands grow and scale their impact. On this episode, I'm going to talk about how I found my focus as a designer and what the 4 rules were that started my design agency, Modern Species. We talk a lot about impact on the show, and what I've found is everyone's impact journey is completely unique. It's part of why I ask basically every guest that comes on the show where their passion came from and how they ended up doing what they're doing now, partly because I just like hearing these stories, but also partly because I find it super inspiring that there are so many different paths to finding your calling. So I'm hoping they're inspiring to you as well. And based on the fact that my single most popular LinkedIn post to date was one in which I just briefly described my own story towards impact, how I found my calling, I'm assuming people do like hearing these stories. And since I haven't technically shared that story on this podcast to you all, dear listeners, I figured it might be time to do a little bit more detailed version of that LinkedIn post to add a little bit more color to my story. So, my personal story, at least my current journey, started about 15 years ago when I essentially just grew a bit disillusioned about my career as a graphic designer. I couldn't help but feel this kind of sinking feeling that I was mainly just designing pretty trash that made rich people richer. And this was cemented in my mind when I was at an event, which was a launch party for a company I helped brand. And of course, I was over there at the appetizers, eating my way through all the treats, when I looked up to see someone grab a brochure that I had designed. And they looked at it briefly. I'm hoping they were looking impressed, but then they just threw it in the garbage bin. So not only was it painful to think of this thing I just poured my heart and soul into being so insignificant to this person that it wasn't even worth a closer look, but he didn't even have the decency to put it just back on the counter for someone else, or even find a recycling bin. It didn't help the whole situation was the party was a bunch of rich people trying to sell stuff to other rich people, which just would make them all richer. Bottom line, I just felt gross. I felt like there had to be something more to my career than all of this, and I felt like I probably needed a break from design. So my then fiance and I at the time decided we could both use a break. So we quit our jobs, sold our condo, bought a one-way ticket to Eastern Europe because that was the cheapest ticket we could find at the time. Instead of blowing tens of thousands of dollars on a wedding, we instead eloped and just went on an extended honeymoon. During those travels throughout mostly Eastern Europe, a brief stint in Western Europe, and a chunk of time in Southeast Asia, we met tons of amazing people, learned about all these different cultures, and realized how boring life could be when you didn't have a purpose. Along the way, I had a few key realizations that kind of led to my story. Number 1, while I was sitting in a craft beer bar in Brussels, Belgium that had over 2,000 different beers available, all with the correct logoed glass and coasters, it occurred to me that some lucky designer out there got to design for breweries. So I thought to myself, well, why can't I design for things I love when I return to work? Seemed like a good idea at the time. Number 2, while having casual conversations with other travelers and, locals in the country we visited, I realized over and over how much more aware they were about what was going on in the United States, whether politically or socially or anything like that, than I was about what was going on in their country, even though I was literally in their country at that time. That made me realize that I could do a much better job paying attention to the rest of the world, still could to be honest, but also that the rest of the world is watching and oftentimes imitating our culture for good or bad. So when I returned, I thought, well, maybe I can find a way to set a better example. And then moment number 3, when traveling in Cambodia, I saw all this ridiculously beautiful nature with piles of plastic water bottles in front of these super historic sites. I also saw children burning their trash in their front yard, much of which was designed by someone like me, because these packages that they were burning weren't designed to work with the Cambodia waste recovery system. And in fact, if we're being honest, at that time and date, they were probably not designed with any good end of life in mind. It just wasn't really a conversation being had much. So when I returned back to the United States, I wondered, could I just find a better way to design more responsibly? So we eventually ran out of money and had to come back to the United States. And when we did, I looked around for a job that could give me an opportunity to explore some of these ideas further. Unfortunately, nobody was hiring at the moment, probably partly because it was a low point in the Great Recession. But also, everywhere I looked, like around my immediate area, there's nobody really checking off these boxes. Like they might have been designing for things I cared about, but not in a responsible way, or they might be doing responsible design, but not in an industry I could be passionate about. So I couldn't find the place for me. And like many a good entrepreneur, I just decided to do it myself. So roughly about 14 years ago, I formed the agency that is now known as Modern Species. And when I did so, I set down these 4 basic rules. 1, I would focus on an industry that I'm passionate about. 2, I would support companies and people who are trying to make the world better. 3, I would consider the economic, environmental, and ethical impacts of my design decisions to help my clients make better decisions. And 4, I would operate my business in a way that matches my values and proves that sustainable and socially responsible practices are good for business. These rules led me straight into the natural product and health and wellness industries, where I still focus today. They led me to working exclusively with companies that are driven by a desire to solve real problems and make the world better in whatever way they can. They led me to learn everything I could about topics like sustainable design, social responsibility, behavioral psychology, consumer or conscious consumers and consumer economics, etc., and whatever else would allow me to help my clients bring their brands to life in a way that would match their mission and values so that they could grow their brand and scale their impact. These rules also led me to becoming B Corp certified, 1% for the Planet member, and carbon neutral, and so much more, so I could continuously improve the way I ran my business and match my values. So that's the abridged story of how I came to find my path, why Modern Species exists, and why you're listening to this podcast right now, because this is just one more way for me to help fulfill my purpose of helping launch, evolve, and grow better for the world brands to scale their impact so that we can collectively bring about a more just, regenerative, and healthy society so all species can thrive. So if you have a story you think we should share, whether it's your own or somebody else's, please email us at evolve@modernspecies.com. Thanks for listening. If you'd like to learn more about my agency, visit modernspecies.com. Subscribe to our podcast and YouTube channel for more innovator interviews, expert advice, and leadership discussions. If you like this episode, leave a heart, thumbs up, or review, and share it with your colleagues. As an ever-evolving show, we also love feedback, so send us your thoughts or ideas for who we should talk to next to evolve@modernspecies.com.